say the people who they know in their mind what they want and they're trying to do their affirmations and they're really trying to produce that change. They want to be the magnet for like all those things. But when the energy on that really deep cellular level that they can't touch, when something's not right there, that's where homeopathy comes in to like really bolster that for them, just to like elevate them and make it easier. A lot of my patients have done things like, say, Joe Dispenza's work, like they'll meditate every morning. They're imagining themselves the way they want to be, and they're like really intentional, working so hard. And then 2 years later, they come in for a consult, they take a remedy like Carcinosin, and all of this crazy stuff starts to happen for them. And they're like, whoa. It's like the power of those drops and a well-indicated frequency for you can just like shoot you just so far in that healing trajectory. But if people just realize the true power of frequency alone, I think that they could transform, their whole lives. And I think that God has given that to each and every one of us. The monarchs, like the rich and the famous, they were using homeopathy. At the turn of the 19th century and 1900s, we had over 100 homeopathic hospitals in the US alone.
Hello, my loves. Welcome back to the channel. So today I have a super exciting video. I interviewed the one and only Melissa Kupsch, who is a homeopath. And so we are going to dive into all things homeopathy, how it relates to manifestation, energy and frequency, quantum physics, how illnesses and things get passed down from generations up to 7 generations back, all that good stuff. So if you want to learn all about it, keep on watching. Hello, Melissa. I'm so excited to have you on the channel here today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I know we connected, I think, after Nick's podcast.
Yes. For anybody watching, we've actually been wanting to do this for like months and months, and we finally took the time to do this interview. And I just want to say before we get started, I had known about homeopathy my entire life. My grandmother used to use homeopathy, but it wasn't until I heard you speak about homeopathy that I was like, oh my God, my mind is blown, because you touched on frequency and energetics and quantum physics, and I never knew that homeopathy could actually work on these things. So I'm so excited to talk to you about all these things today.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting, in France, you guys have so much more homeopathy sort of present for you guys. So in Australia, if you're growing up, it would be so rare to find somebody who grew up, with even their grandparents using homeopathy. But over there, a lot more of you do. So you're sort of exposed to it a lot earlier. So that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I'm just going to close this because the lighting is crazy. The way I knew about homeopathy was just to help with physical symptoms. And when I heard you talk about energetics and quantum physics, I was just blown away. So, but to get started, for anyone who has never heard about about homeopathy before, how would you explain it?
So homeopathy, it's a system of medicine. It was discovered, nearly 250 going on near 300 years ago. And the idea behind it, it is an energetic system of medicine, but that is medicine of, the physical, the mental, the emotional. So it is a vibrational medicine. So a lot of people these days, we are aware of, the way that the frequency reacts with our body, our mind, our thoughts, and the ways in which it's all integrated. The homeopaths started to map people's health and their physical ailments. But what they found is that with certain physical ailments also came very distinct mental and emotional patterns. So the way that I stumbled into homeopathy was that my sister, who's only 1 year younger than me, she was chronically sick. And she would get these urinary tract infections like every time she had sex. She would be taken to hospital and she would get an infection that would sort of run through her whole body. So the doctors there are sort of going through and they just had no idea what was triggering this. It was no physical issue. There was no latex allergy. It would happen if it was different people. So, it wasn't just she was allergic to one person. It was this weird response in her body. And after, 6 years of just going in and out of hospital, what we ended up doing, so my dad's a doctor. She'd done all of the medical things. And at the end of that, they just said, you need to be on prophylactic antibiotics every day for the rest of your life, which we all know is just like no one can live like that. And she tried all of the natural things too, because at that point I was studying to be a naturopath. So all of the herbs, the diet, the grounding, she literally had done everything. She was so desperate. And this guy at my university kept saying, you should try homeopathy, you should try homeopathy. And I was completely uninterested, not knowing anything about it. But once she met with him and he took her whole case, so he was looking at her physical symptoms, all of these sort of like infections. He's looking at her history, our family's medical history, because we know that things can be passed down. But that's the physical things as well as the mental and the emotional things. It's all an energy that can be inherited. And then looking at, her traumas and the things that would have lodged in sort of her spirit, I would say, her vital force, all of the energy that flows through her body. And he was really just sort of playing detective, looking at her energy fields. Then he gave her this little bottle of a remedy called Staphysagria, which is just a frequency harnessed from a plant. So when you're looking at homeopathy, we take frequencies from all different things in nature. And they can be minerals, they can be plants, they can be sort of even a little bit of human tissue, because we all vibrate at a unique frequency, and so does even diseased tissue. So the principles of it is that when you stimulate a body with a tiny, minute dose of that frequency, the vital force, the energy within the human body recognizes the stimulus and it mounts up a response. So say for my sister with the Staphysagria, she took that, her body recognized that frequency and it pushed back against the Staphysagria. And in doing so, it strengthened her vital force. So she never went to hospital again after that, didn't need the antibiotics, went on to have a healthy family and all the things that she was told would never happen for her. So when I saw those massive shifts, that's where I started thinking, what on earth have I just seen? I don't understand how some drops in a bottle that she only took under the tongue could change, like, all of her genitourinary things. Like, these are urinary tract infections. It was mind blowing. And then you get into the researching the history of homeopathy and you realize it's very rich and scientifically, like, it's very supported. It's just a very suppressed science, really.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing how just the frequency can help the body just heal itself, because our bodies naturally heal, like we naturally heal ourselves. If we cut our finger, it just naturally heals.
And it's like we know that and we just are so used to those sort of peripheral healing things, but we forget that at the very core, the human being, the human body, all of our tissues, all of our cells, when the scientists break it down to those smallest levels, those subatomic particles, they really find that all the human being is made up of is humming, vibrating energy. And scientists are saying that, it's in the mainstream newspapers now, they're saying this universe is vibrational. It's all confirmed, like, scientifically. And so it makes sense, doesn't it, that an energetic medicine could actually get to the core of the issue, that it could be an energetic issue at the core that's causing the disease processes.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember you, I don't know if it was on Instagram or on Nick Zai's podcast, but I remember you talking about the experiment that they did with mice and the generational pattern.
Oh,
Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought it was so
yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. Yeah, so they've repeated this study a couple of times. Like, I'm sure it's been done many times, but I've seen a few of them documented using the different scents. But essentially, what the scientists did is that they got a group of mice and they would expose them to the scent of a cherry blossom. And then moments later, they would electroshock them. So they would really drill that into them, the scent, and then they would shock them and just really traumatize these poor mice. So they did that for a period of time. Then those mice went on to have their own, breed their own mice, the next generation of mice. Now, what they did with the next set of offspring was they exposed them to the scent of the cherry blossom. But even though these mice had never ever been electroshocked, they went into a frenzied panic because it was like it was drilled into them, that scent. It's like that cellular memory, that trauma was passed down. Now, the scientists replicated it, and, even down to the third generation of mice who had never been electroshocked, nor had their parents, they still remembered that scent and went into a frenzy. In real life examples, we see this quite a lot. And with, say, the prisoner of war victims from Nazi Germany, years later, scientists are really looking at why are the grandchildren of the prisoners of war, developing PTSD, even though there's nothing traumatic in their lifetime that we can point to. And the thing about like the mainstream understanding of, health, mental health, even the human spirit, is that doctors cannot offer them, no psychiatrist can really offer them true solutions. Talk therapy is one thing, try and talk about it. But because the trauma never happened in their lifetime, it's really hard for them to get to the bottom of, what they feel and why. And as a homeopath, I have seen this, day in, day out in my clinic, in that we're working with children sometimes, and they might be only, 10 years old. And they'll say some dark, heavy things like, I've just always wanted to end my life. Like it's been like a dark cloud over me my whole life. And when you look up their family tree, you can see these intensely traumatic things. And it's all energy, that was flowing through their ancestors and all of these traumas. But that's what, contributes to making them as a baby. You get a little bit from mom and a little bit from dad. And if people have trauma going up both sides of their family tree, sometimes it sort of compiles in this really, and it's a big, and all it is an energetic distortion. And when we use the homeopathy to trigger that divine intelligence in them, to just recalibrate that energy, let the traumas go, it is so fascinating. And I mean, to give you like one example of that particularly, I've worked with a lot of people in the Middle East, and they've got like these panic sort of anxiety disorders, like they can hardly leave the house like by the end of it. And it will be simple things like grocery shopping, anything in a crowded room, they get overwhelmed, then they're like fainting in the grocery store and
Oh my
panicked, or
God.
they've got these big phobias. It's really full on. And when you take their case, it doesn't really make sense because nothing in their lifetime has ever been that traumatic. And yet, going up their family tree, one or two generations, it was their grandparents who were in bunkers when like bombs were being dropped, and they really thought they were going to die. So, all of that stress and tension. Now, there's a homeopathic remedy called Argentum Knit, and I gave it to these multiple families, the grandchildren that I was working with, and it completely recalibrated their energy. Even this is, 50 years after the original like traumas with bombs being dropped, and you can still recalibrate it. So people just knowing that this medicine even exists, because most people, they think, these things, it's like, they're like, oh, it's just my personality. I'm just an anxious person. I'm just a depressed
Yeah,
person, and things, you don't have to be.
exactly. Yeah, I think that's something that when we don't know homeopathy, we don't know that it's like something that we may have inherited. And even I'm thinking about people who never met their grandparents or don't know much about their family history. And I think you said it goes down to like 7 generations that the DNA, the trauma can be passed down.
Mm.
So that's a lot. Like we don't know what happened to the 7 generations before us. So it is just mind blowing. And it's like you said, sometimes we think it's part of it's just who we are. But no, we don't have to suffer. Like if
Mm.
it's impacting our lives, there can be something done about it.
The beauty of it is that you wouldn't even need to know the explicit traumas that the older generations went through, because if
Mm.
it is an energetic distortion in you, all of your current symptoms will tell the story of where the energy is stuck. So if it's like you've got asthma or eczema or recurrent tonsillitis or skin, issues, whatever it is, all of this will point you towards the frequency that will bring you back into alignment. Same goes if you said, like, I've got this deep, dark depression, or I've got this severe like anxiety or and fear of like having no money. And you can be as detailed as you want. Like there are certain medicines where people will say like, they have this constant fear of like poverty and not having enough money. So then it's obvious in that person, what remedies we're going to be needing. But when you go back, that's probably where you see they probably had ancestors who had literally nothing, where it was life or death if they ran out of things. And that's why we've got people walking around these days, even though they've got money and food, they're still living in this bracing themselves like fear.
I mean, what's the remedy for someone who has that kind of fear? Because I feel like there's a lot of people who still have that fear, even though they may be very wealthy, but they still like they're holding on to it.
Yeah, so you'd want to take the whole case. But if I
Yeah,
was
of
to
course.
generalize and give an example, one is called Arsenicum album, and it's actually made from the poison arsenic.
Mm.
But because it's homeopathically prepared in a pharmacy, you're diluting and succussing to the point where all you've got is the frequency of arsenic. There's not one bit of like toxic arsenic in a homeopathic remedy. So it's safe, but the energy of it is very strong. And the person who's in an arsenicum album state, they usually are your typical sort of worry warts. They look around, they're often like quite skinny, but they've got this sort of restless, constant anxiety. So they can be prone to things like asthma, like pretty badly, but they get a lot of irritable bowel type symptoms. But it also makes sense when you think about it, right? Because the worry wart, the person who's constantly in their head thinking, the body doesn't have enough time to focus on digestion or anything like that. So they get this irritable bowel and all of those symptoms because their whole energy is just like, da, 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 da. They're like completely freaking out. But the Arsenicum album person is usually trying to control their external environment because of their anxiety. They're trying to control everything. So they can be quite controlling with money, and very anxious about it. And the typical worry warts, planning their day and, oh, what's going to go wrong? Because they sort of think if they get out ahead of it and just try and control everything, well, then, okay, I'm safe. And when you go back through the Arsenicum album's sort of life history, oftentimes there was a big shock in their life, something like their neighbor, that they really loved died of cancer when they were really young. It's usually something along the health lines that can trigger an arsenicum album to try and control everything because at one point they just felt so out of control. So that's sort of one example out of hundreds of them. But yeah, it all sort of points towards like a certain picture of a person.
Yeah, and in homeopathy, you take the whole case of a person because I know you get a lot of comments like, "What is the remedy for this?" and "What's the remedy for that?" But it's like we look at the whole case of the person. And I'm wondering, what are some of the like more peculiar symptoms or like weird symptoms that are very important when you're taking a case of homeopathy? There's like these little things that could go unnoticed, but are actually really important in homeopathy.
Okay, so I'll give you some examples. So your homeopath is always going to ask you the big obvious things about you. What are your physical health complaints? And they'll often get you to give a timeline. So go from the moment you were born and just work me up until the current day. So if you had a lot of eczema, asthma, tonsillitis, any of those sorts of things growing up, if you were a really shy kid, if you were really scared, if you were the kid who was hiding behind the couch and, didn't want to say hello to anyone, that would be an indication of like what sort of remedies we're looking at. Then, as you're going through any of the big traumas, so I always ask my patients, what are the two biggest traumas like in your life and what comes to mind? Um, because that will give you insight, into people and where their energy has been stuck. Because most people have been through traumatic things in one way or another. So when, they tell you, okay, the biggest grief was my parents' divorce, well, okay, then that sort of energy is going to play into it. If they say, I was molested when I was young, that sort of energy is going to be important. So I always ask them about their traumas. And then things like your thermals, do you run hot, like your temperature? Because some people, they're naturally hot and sweaty. Some people are always chilly and can't get warm. That's all an indication of your energy. Um, and then, yeah, even your hobbies, things that you're really good at, you'll find some people with certain energy types, You can have your really creative, intuitive people. I mean, one weird thing that always happens in this certain group of remedies, the people are often really spiritually sort of gifted. It's as if the veil between, this physical world and the spiritual world for them is quite thin. And they tend to be definitely your creative types. But also they can be prone to some of the more addictive type things, alcohol, drugs, and they might feel depression, more intensely. It's sort of as if they get all that duality, like all of that light and divine inspiration, but then also they can feel the weight of this world a whole lot heavier if things are not going well. So, like when a child's or when somebody says to me, oh, I've been able to see ghosts or something, I had imaginary friends as a kid, but they were not imaginary. Those sorts of things to a homeopath, that's going to be important. Whereas, like a doctor would probably think you were just bonkers.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that. And then say, if I was to give you an example of a random thing that, someone might say to me in a consult, which then points me towards what remedy they need. I was working with a school teacher about a year ago, and we were just working on fertility. But she said to me, like, she's always been very prone to anxiety, and she's sort of worried, when I get pregnant, what if I'm just like a big anxious mess? And so we wanted to work on that first and foremost. And in one of our follow-up consults, she said, oh, I had this like really weird situation happen at work. And she's like, I don't want to tell you because it's embarrassing, but she's like, long story short, it's turned me into this anxious mess, and it's like just gotten really out of control. And I said, if you don't mind telling me what it was that triggered it, it might be insightful for me as to, your energy, your vital force, and what's caused you to sort of get in this state. And she said, oh, well, long story short, I dropped like a pin on the floor, just like a thumbtack out of the wall. And all of a sudden, I developed this like obsessive compulsive sort of fear of what if I dropped the pin into my water bottle and then I swallow it? And now I've just got this big fear of any sharp, pointy things. Like in general, it's like really taking over. I just can't function anymore. And it was a fear of small, sharp, pointy things. If you were to go through our homeopathy textbooks, you would find under the remedy Silica, which is a remedy that a lot of women need, and they're very much prone to anxiety. But it says anxiety, sharp, pointy objects. And it's just very descriptive, a lot of these things in homeopathy, because, and people would be surprised how many people actually have the same fears as them or the same addictions as them. Like we tend to think, oh, but I'm the weird one and I'm unique. And the homeopath will tell you, you are not. Like it's just energy, and it manifests in these slightly bizarre things. So I always tell people, don't hold back on telling your homeopath every weird and wonderful thing about you, because it might just be that tips it over. And for her, once we took the Silica, because we had actually started in that case on Arsenicum album because she had a lot of health anxieties and worrying. But when we moved to that Silica, amazing. It's like night and day, relax, you know?
And it's like instant, right? I mean, the I don't want to say reaction, for lack of a better word, like the reaction to
Yeah,
the remedy is instant because it's
pretty
free.
much. So yeah, frequency floods the body very quickly. So it's not like a drug that you would need to take for 6 weeks before you can, or maybe feel anything. It's usually once you've got on the right track. Having said that, I always do tell people healing can absolutely be like, and a lot of the time with homeopathy, when you're flooded with that frequency, it can bring up old things that you do need to work through in order to get that beautiful peace on the other side. So, say, for example, sexual abuse is unbelievably common. When they take these remedies, it often brings this anger up sort of from the depths of their cells, all this bitterness and resentment, and it just bubbles up, and they're like, oh my gosh. So maybe for a couple of weeks they just feel like a raging mess, and then that energy moves. And the thing is that they've actually gotten it up and out of the cells, as opposed to, if we go to a psychologist or we take a drug to try and suppress it, we never actually get that anger out. And it's just really toxic for the body, and the body doesn't know what to do with it, because often people didn't really get to talk about the situation, or whatever shame has sort of kept them silent on it. So the body starts to manifest its own symptoms of the disease, getting that up and out. The people will tell you within a month, they just don't even recognize themselves like for the better, because they're like, oh, that anger, everything that kept me captive and all that resentment is actually gone. And some people don't believe they could ever let it go, but they really can.
Yep, yep. I've seen that with personally taking remedies, like the emotions that come up. It's like, oh my gosh, why am I crying right now? But it's like it's so powerful because the energy moves, and like you said, it gets out of the body and then it's gone.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw, or if I think I probably did tell Nick, but I was once making my first aid kits with my mum. And yeah,
I
we were
love
just
that
sitting,
story. I love
yeah,
that.
we're just sitting at the kitchen table, and I dropped a bottle of Ignatia. And as you've probably had, were you raised on the pillules?
Yes, my grandmother gave us a lot of how do you pronounce that in English? Oscillococcinum.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so yeah, I had the pillules.
So that remedy is the number one cold or flu medication in France. So that's where if you went to your pharmacist in France, they'd say, all right, oscillococcinum, I would call it. And then
Okay.
that would just be go-to. In Australia or the US, you would never find like a pharmacist handing you homeopathy. So that's so funny. But yeah, so the pillules I was using to make up my first aid kits, and I dropped a bottle of Ignatia. And Ignatia, the remedy, is really good for grief, shock, fright. It has an affinity for the lungs because, even we know in traditional Chinese medicine, the lungs have an affinity for grief. So, anything that manifests there. So the women, as a characteristic, they tend to sigh a lot, like they'll go, oh, and it's like their lungs are a bit like constricted and not right. Anyway, with the Ignatia dropping over, instead of getting up and walking to the bin and throwing the pillules in the bin, I just threw them in my mouth. I kept making my first aid kits. And within 20 minutes, my mum and I have just sort of evolved into this conversation while we're making them, about my mum's divorce from my stepdad. And in this conversation, it's like just brought up immediately. All this energy has just come right up, and I'm in tears. And I'm like, I'm laughing and I'm crying at the same time because I'm shocked that I'm crying because we were having such a good time making them. So then I'm shocked. I'm like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from? Like, I can't believe. And I said to my mum, um, the words that actually came out of my mouth was when they separated. I said, do you think he ever really loved us? And I sort of choked on the words as they came out. And my mum sort of like stopped and she's like, are you joking? And then I was sort of, oh, I'm laughing and crying. But it was like, it really sounded like a child was asking. And so when you look back at my situation, if the homeopath was to ask me what's the biggest trauma you've ever been through, I would just say I was really sad when my mum and my stepdad separated when I was 12 years old. It just came as a complete shock. And because he wasn't my real dad, he sort of, when they separated, I didn't see him anymore. So, to a 12-year-old, that almost is like a death. You sort of grow up with this person and then they're gone. And so you look back and I'm like, I completely understand how a little 12-year-old just suppressed all of this emotion around that. And so to be, 30 years old, just making these first aid kits and actually crying about it, I was shocked. And then I was sort of like laughing, with my mum of like, wow, that obviously is something that I've held on to for a long time, thinking that he left because he didn't love us. And so, I see this with my patients all the time. And the thing about homeopathy is you don't even have to be aware of the trauma to like take a remedy and have all that emotion come up. And then you say, whoa, I didn't realize that was even hiding in my cells. So it's not like, you need to even know why you're a bit bent out of shape. It's like, ready or not, it's just going to
It's
come up
coming.
because your body is so smart. Your vital force, that divine, intelligent, energy that, created us in the womb, it knows where the traumas are and it knows what is blocking, our higher self. And so when people start taking homeopathic medicines that are well suited to them, you see all sorts of things like, great relationships, they start to manifest, great jobs. They will often leave really crap jobs because the body just and the divine intelligence is like, I can't do this anymore. That's a soul destroying job. We're not going to do that. It protects you, and it just wants your life to be better.
Yeah, I remember you talked about Carcinosin on Instagram, where people miasm, right? The miasm where
Yes.
people tolerate the intolerable,
Yep.
and yeah, it's just like they stop, like, because it's not, it's like the subconscious, and like you said, you don't even have to know exactly what's going on or why do I feel this way, because that's also where the placebo effect has no validity, because a lot of people say, oh, homeopathy is just placebo, but no, because you didn't even know that you had that and now it's healing.
For sure. And
Yeah.
even when you're treating things like, babies or animals, people even use it on their vegetation. And there's just no way the evidence is so clear that it's so far beyond a placebo. So, 6-week-old babies with intense colic where they're just screaming nonstop. And then they find their first dose of colosynthis, like this tiny little pill or a little drop of liquid in the mouth. And you see that baby relax almost immediately. The parents are like, what have I just witnessed? And a lot of them go on to then study homeopathy because to the person who doesn't understand frequency, it looks like magic. It's like, how has that just happened for this person? But when you have the knowledge that you do, it's like you recognize the spirit, the energy, you know exactly what it's doing and why these people all of a sudden start attracting all of these amazing things into their life. It's all energy. And once it's recalibrated, things change. And it really helps for, say the people who they know in their mind what they want and they're trying to do their affirmations and they're really trying to produce that change. They want to be the magnet for like all those things. But when the energy on that really deep cellular level that they can't touch, when something's not right there, that's where homeopathy comes in to like really bolster that for them, just to like elevate them and make it easier. Because I think a lot of my patients have done things like, say, Joe Dispenza's work, like they'll meditate every morning. They're imagining themselves the way they want to be. And they're like really intentional, working so hard. And then 2 years later, they come in for a consult, they take a remedy like Carcinosin, and all of this crazy stuff starts to happen for them. And they're like, whoa, it's like the power of those drops and a well indicated frequency for you can just like shoot you just so far in that healing trajectory.
Yeah, because it goes into the subconscious and everything is frequency. So if the frequency is right, it was Masaru Emoto who had done the research as well on water and on frequency. And he talks a lot about frequency as well. I remember in one of his books, he's even like, if you're trying to manifest something like love, or success in your career, but that frequency isn't right, it's just not, there's that block, right? And
Mm.
so I remember you saying as well, I'm paraphrasing, but you don't find homeopathy, but homeopathy finds you. And like that, it is God's medicine. And I believe that too. I watch your stories a lot and you mention, God a lot and spirit. And I just have like a question. What do you say to people who are, let's say, who have reservations based on religion? Because I've heard people, at least here in France, I've heard people say that as soon as we talk about energy and frequency, they're like, oh, no, I don't want to touch that. Like, it's like
Mm.
those people that may be very sort of religious and their beliefs don't let them even try homeopathy because they think it's a hoax or they're touching something that's too esoteric. What do you usually say to someone like that who has maybe some reservations about trying it?
Mm. So I definitely understand what it's like to come from that perspective of, fear of dabbling in something that maybe is spiritually off because just in my experience personally, I have seen people who have, pursued certain things, certain like dark, they'd be reading books about the occult and sort of like really wicked ones. And I would see that and I would say to these people, I would not be doing that sort of stuff if I was you. So it's like I do come from a place of understanding that, there is spiritually dark things in this world. as for homeopathy and any medicine like with energy, just in my own studies and my own experience of it, looking into the lives of my patients, all I see is sort of like God's blessings in like the way that their life and their health transforms, like the baby that was covered in eczema from head to toe, who is just healed of that, and their whole spirit becomes settled. Um, when you look even biblically at, all of the things, to me, it supports homeopathy, and even in energy, in like matters of the spirit. It definitely talks about like disease processes being linked to emotions and stuff like that, and warns us to keep like our emotions well calibrated. But say for, the many people, let's say, who were sexually abused as children, to see them set free of that resentment, I can only deduce is like a God given, like setting free. We're using God's harmony, that frequency of nature, to mirror up to the human body. The second part of it, I was actually having a conversation with one of the tradesmen who was working on our house recently, and he's a devout Christian, and he thinks that any sort of energy medicine is new age, and sort of like wicked. He wouldn't touch any of it, and I was like, that's so interesting, because to me, when you look at the human body, nobody can deny that when you get down to those lowest levels of the body, we are powered by energy. The heart beats, it's a frequency. The brain emits these waves, it's a frequency that we're reading with all these devices. There's nothing wrong with the human body. When you look under the microscope at the moment of conception and the sperm reaches the egg, you see a blast of light. That's called the zinc spark. Now, that is energy, and it's a divine blueprint. It's the moment that the soul comes in, but it's this energy and that intelligence that knows how to keep the body, healthy and growing and on track. And to me, that's sort of like the human spirit that's always with us. And I just think that homeopathy is a medicine of the spirit. So yeah, to me, there's just not one wicked thing about it that I could ever, possibly see. It's actually really interesting, and I've pondered it many times, but I've worked with a lot of children who have had intense night terrors, and like where the parents are like, they're acting like they're possessed. It's so scary. They wake up, they scream, they like smash their head against a wall, or things that are like really full on. Now, when I treat them with the homeopathic medicine, it all recalibrates. They stop doing it. Like if there was any violent behavior, it all stops. And I've pondered, what is it about homeopathy that seems to ward off this darkness? And I think what it is you've raised and recalibrated the energy of that child, their spirit stronger. They're less susceptible to this external sort of spiritual attack, which for many people can be very real. So, if anything, yeah, I just honestly think it's like such a God-given medicine, a God-given protection, and it allows us to tap back into that true love and like peaceful essence that I think we were really created for. And we weren't created to, have disease. But it also lines up, with a lot of biblical things. When we're looking at the generational curses, it sort of makes sense when you look at, these traumas are handed down. I imagine that's much what, the Lord is talking about. One thing that people will ask me is, was it founded by a Freemason? That is true, that way back when, a lot of the founders of the original founder, Samuel Hahnemann, he was a Freemason, a low-level Freemason. But a lot of people were back then more for the connections. I think not every Freemason understands the level of sort of wickedness that some people will take it to. So for some people, it was sort of like this, you sort of get access to these sorts of things. But if you were to compare the people who criticize homeopathy in that regard, would still, if they were in a car accident, they would go, to the hospital and want life-saving drugs. And when you look back at the roots of like pharmacy, they're much more questionable than the roots of homeopathy. The Rockefellers who really pumped into modern medicine and suppressed homeopathy. It's, I think medicine is all about the intention. What is your intention? And it is to use homeopathy to heal. And same, with pharmacy, if I was in a car accident, I would absolutely go and use medicine. I think it was all provided by God for our highest good. So I'm not concerned about, yeah, necessarily that. But I think that homeopathy definitely works within the scope of the way that God intended our bodies to function, for us to have knowledge of energy, frequency, and how to create a life that is God honoring. Because a lot of people truly want that, but they're so stuck in their chains that like they really struggle to live that life.
Yeah, especially if they grew up with that religious background. It's so like ingrained in who they are. They're not even like open to trying something new. And it makes me frustrated because it's like so many people could really benefit from this, but their belief system doesn't let them actually be open to it or try it. And I completely agree with you when you say it's like God's medicine, because he gave us everything on this planet to be healed, and everything is frequency. Like that's just science. So I completely agree with you on that. And I want to talk a little bit about the history as well of homeopathy, because when I first heard you talk about it, you talked about the hospitals. I had no idea that there used to be homeopathic hospitals. And I also love what you're currently creating right now. So that's just so many exciting things to come. So let's talk a little bit about the history.
Mm. So, homeopathy was founded the late 1700s, and it was really doctors back then who became homeopaths. They were all of the medical men. So they've realized, wow, we can use these tiny doses of medicine to trigger these big changes. So back then, you start to see the epidemics floating through, things like Spanish flu, scarlet fever, cholera, these sorts of things that back then could wipe out thousands and thousands of lives. So homeopathy really shot to fame around the epidemic. So you had a lot of the monarchs, like the rich and the famous, they were using homeopathy. So Samuel Hahnemann, the founding medical doctor who then discovered homeopathy, he retired in France. So he was working there before he died. And sort of in the day, he would treat all sorts of famous people in France. And then by night, he would treat the poor, and he would just open up his clinic space. They would all come in and get treatment. So it was really quite well known. At the turn of the 19th century and 1900s, we had over 100 homeopathic hospitals in the US alone. We had, I think, 5 in Australia. But homeopathy was taught at a lot of the major big league universities, so Boston University, and it was just really successful. And it was really at that point sort of par on par with the Western sort of established medicine at the time. So with these hospitals, you had people going in with things like Spanish flu, and all of the documented mortality rates will show people it's unambiguous that homeopathy was more effective back then as a system of medicine. And you can really just see that. And then really petrochemical drugs started to come onto the scene. J.D. Rockefeller, he's sort of considered the father of pharmaceutical medicine, but he himself had his own private homeopath. He actually had 3 homeopaths who looked after his family alone, and he lived well into his 90s under homeopathic care. So he famously said, before he sort of realized how much money I think he could make with pharmaceuticals, he had said publicly, homeopathy is a progressive and aggressive step in medicine. So he actually, in the beginning of, that period, he was very much pro homeopathy. And then it wasn't too long before he was like, eh. And really, then they were donating millions of dollars to the universities and would say, we'll give you all this money, but you must stop teaching homeopathy. And then, the allopaths start coming through, all of these Western medical doctors, and all that they have learned is that way of treating with drugs. They were actually never even taught about homeopathy. Most of them have no idea this system of medicine exists. My dad's a doctor, and like he would get zero any inclination, I mean, on nutrition or anything. They don't cover any of it. It's all really focused around surgeries, drugs, imaging, anything that sort of goes towards that slant. And so, over time, then all of these hospitals, if you don't have people studying homeopathy, you run out of homeopaths, you can't keep these hospitals going. And the medical, costs, even though homeopathy is very effective, it's like very cost effective. You still have to maintain these big buildings, all of the stuff, all of that. So it's really just a financial and like a suppression from the top. There's no denying that it's been deliberate. The TGA, the FDA, they attack it, but I have never really been concerned by the external threats to homeopathy. It's like the truth is the truth. It always survives. People are finding it now more than ever. We are on an absolute up and up. And it won't be long, I think, before everybody realizes that this is the true system of medicine, the way it was meant to be. And then we have our Western medical model for when, the emergency situations. If you're in a car accident, these things require that sort of law of opposites. So the foundational principle of homeopathy, the law of similars, we support the body, we heal it from the inside out. But in those emergency situations where, you might need it, that's when you actually want the mainstream hospitals. Here in Australia, I don't know what it's like for you, but our hospitals are really at breaking point with chronic disease, with the amount of surgeries that need to be done. It's like we've just worked ourselves into this state that they cannot keep up with what's needed for this generation of people. So my goal as a homeopath and someone who sort of is educating homeopaths coming through is that we need to take the weight of all of the chronic health things and, the first aid acutes at home that people can really treat themselves, so that we can allow those mainstream systems to actually focus on what they are good at, which is the emergencies. Because the time will come, and I know my dad says this to me all the time, the time is coming where people will call an ambulance or you'll need emergency care and there won't be anyone there to help you because they are so overwhelmed at the moment. So that's definitely our goal, is get as many people out, get as many people healthy and at least on the right road to free up that space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw you talk a lot about you had a lot of patients who struggled with fertility, right? And I like homeopathy can really help with that. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that as
Yeah,
well?
for sure. So that was the niche that I originally, when I graduated, I sort of accidentally slash intentionally fell into. I did love it. And I started to do sort of public fertility trials where it was like, try this protocol and see if you're pregnant within 4 months. And I'd had 12 people do, two separate trials, but 12 people who conceived within that, 4 month period. And it's just like realizing, wow, this is so powerful. So there's a key remedy, for example, folliculinum, which is made from estrogen. It's a synthetic estrogen, but they make it in the pharmacy. So that energy is estrogen. Now, when you take that as a woman, the body recognizes that stimulation. Now, a lot of us took the oral contraceptive pill or any other drugs that have suppressed our reproductive, hormones. When you take those drugs, you really shut down ovulation altogether. Some people will take it for 20 years before they see me and they're trying for a baby. It's like they just pop it out like it's nothing, and we just shut down our entire reproductive process. But then, the issues can linger. So even something, when you want to get pregnant, you really need that quality, egg white cervical mucus. So most people have forgotten that, this mucus even exists until they're trying for a baby and they're like, wow, I don't have that mucus anymore. But it's because you've really messed with those hormonal profiles that you stop getting that mucus that is needed for the sperm to swim up to the egg. So when a woman's fertile, she's releasing, she's got a lot of estrogen that is allowing that mucus to take, place there. When you take that folliculinum, the homeopathic estrogen, that cervical mucus comes back so much increased that people are like, whoa, this homeopathic stuff is like super powerful. I know before I started working in fertility, I did it, that protocol on myself just to see like how effective is it. I think I'd already had two of my sons by this point, but I was just saying to my husband, oh my goodness, that is outrageous, the boost in cervical mucus. Now, for so many women, that's all that was missing. It's the missing link to them getting pregnant. Because as you can imagine, if the sperm, goes into that canal and there's no mucus, it just dries out. It can't possibly get up to the egg. So some people, if they're going from their doctor, they're going straight to IVF or something really full on, when all it was a matter of the sperm couldn't swim up with the mucus. So with our fertility protocol, though, it also does cover the generational inheritance, those sorts of things that can be causing infertility. If there was any history of STDs, sometimes we've got to clear that energy, that frequency, so that they can conceive. And sometimes it's, like we were saying with that carcinosin picture, like the body is so depleted, their energy is run ragged. They've been, you know, burning the candle at both ends. Their body just does not have the energy that it needs, that divine spark to grow a baby. So we need to rejuvenate, the woman's whole body. And the beauty of doing homeopathy as a fertility treatment prior is that you recalibrate a lot of things so that then when you actually do conceive, your baby will not inherit those intense sort of distortions in energy that maybe were a part of your life. So, if I dealt with my grief by taking that Ignatia, prior to having children, well, they don't inherit that distortion. And the same goes for any of the generational things, anxiety, everything that comes down the family lines. If I'm really well calibrated before I have kids, I give them the best opportunity. Most people, they find it after the fact. But if you did find it before having kids, you're extremely lucky.
Yeah, it's like we're thinking generationally here, and it's just amazing all the people that are coming across homeopathy before having kids. It's like your children will never inherit that energetic frequency. So it's just so helpful. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this message as well. And you were also talking about, I heard you talk about the sperm count going down, like currently in the world is down like it never was before. And
Mm.
are we able with homeopathy to have the sperm count kind of go up and heal that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with men, we just give them a prescription. We don't make it as hormone centered. For men, it's about boosting their whole health, because a vibrant, healthy man with all of his energy flowing correctly, he can make way more and way healthier sperm. So I've worked with people who are also often working alongside a fertility clinic. So they're getting all of their tests done. Because if my system, if they don't conceive, within 6 months, then they're going to move on. And so the beauty of that is that I get to see men when they get their initial sperm count before they start working with homeopathy, and then 6 months after the fact, and people can like quadruple their sperm count. You can just go up and up and up, but it is all about that recalibration and what flows through with that. So sometimes it is just the physical energy, but again, a lot of these men, when they come back to me 4 months later, they'll say, I ended up quitting that job that I absolutely hated. Now I'm doing something that I really love. And, when you look at that, that the man is like, his energy is better. He's waking up every morning and he's not dreading going to work. His vital force is happy. His energy is good. So, of course, the testosterone naturally is going to go up and all of the hormones follow. And then his sperm count is through the roof. So, it's about recalibrating the whole man and really trying to see the essence of any distortions that he used to have and clearing them out. Sometimes it's a matter of the viral load in the body. So if a man has a history of like, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, virus, any of these strong viral loads, if he gets a lot of cold sores, has had shingles, all of things sort of tell us like his body might have viral infections that are just sort of laying dormant. Using homeopathy, we really want to spin them out. So this is our remedies like carcinosin, the cancer nosode. So that can really help to bolster that health and get rid of any chronic fatigue or any of that.
I had no idea that carcinosin, does that help get rid of the viral load?
Yeah, absolutely. It would
Wow.
be one of the biggest. And you know what's so interesting? Carcinosin is obviously, if you were to stay in a really carcinogenic state, the indication is that you are much more prone to getting cancer, right? Because you've not honored your boundaries. You've just run yourself ragged. You're completely depleted, nothing. So that mental and emotional aspect of cancer is often there. But a lot of people just inherit the energetics of like that overdrive in the body that can grow into tumors and cancer. So we really want to down regulate that over proliferation of cells. But, you know, even I was talking to my dad about it and how the cancer miasm, our carcinosin as a remedy, is often used when people have a history of having mono, Epstein-Barr virus, or glandular fever, we call it in Australia. So these people often have like chronic fatigue issues, then they have gut issues. And dad's like, oh, well, even in mainstream medicine, we recognize that somebody with a history of Epstein-Barr virus is more prone to cancer because even on the virus level, to have that in your blood, the cells are more likely to mutate and cause issues. So even mainstream medicine, it recognizes that the high viral load would make you more susceptible to developing cancer. But the homeopath, of course, it's exactly the same. We recognize the same thing because also you have to ask yourself, what energetic susceptibility was within me to get Epstein-Barr virus and be prone to it? And when you map out, you know, the constitution of all of these people, very often when they get Epstein-Barr virus, mono or glandular fever, they are often overwhelmed, overworked, they're emotionally sort of like stifled. Like it doesn't often happen to the really, you know, relaxed, happy-go-lucky people. It's usually like I'm high strung, and it usually happens for women in like even the schooling years when the block exams are coming, or in college and they're really under the pump and they're stressed, and then the body, it almost tries to give it like a hard reset. The body's sort of saying, stop, rest. You can't keep living like this. You can't keep extending yourself. And then they end up with chronic fatigue after because they push themselves too hard. So, yeah, it all plays into it, but definitely carcinosin and the viral load.
Yeah, and I've seen mono. I don't know how it is in Australia and the US, but I've seen it in my school years. It was like everyone had mono, it was everywhere, and we were pushed to our max. I'm thinking now, I don't want my future children to go through that, like that pressure and that stress of the schooling system. And then it would be normal that the body would be like, stop, I need a break. Like, this is too much pressure. And
And you look at that, right? And you think like, oh, it's crazy that so many people would have gotten mono and be pushing themselves so hard. But then you look at how many people these days have cancer. It's out of control. It's like we're pushing ourselves way too hard, and the body needs us to stop living like that.
yeah, and so sometimes subconsciously we contract that illness to have kind of like a reset and a wake up call. And
Mm.
because the body will always send signs, right? But it's like, you're not listening, you're not listening. Let's send you something where you have to listen. Like, you don't have another
Exactly.
choice anymore. And
Yeah.
I just have a question about carcinosin, because is it a recent remedy? Because I was talking to my pharmacist about it, who, I get my remedies from there, and they couldn't even find it in their homeopathy books. And it's like, you can't get your hands on it in France.
Wow, I know you guys have a lot of different laws
Yeah.
around Europe. I know I was talking to a homeopath in Germany, and legally he was only allowed to keep on him, I think, 3 months worth of homeopathic like medicine and prescriptions. I was like, whoa, I am allowed to have, I mean, I've got a warehouse like just full of remedies. So carcinosin, it would be a newer remedy, but it's an extremely common one because it's one of our five miasms. Um, it is one of probably it's probably my most used in clinic, and it's certainly like a big one that like almost every homeopath knows. But that's really interesting that, yeah, I'll have to send you something specifically on it so you can like, yeah, get into it. But it is definitely newer. And when you look back at, you know, the time when homeopathy was thriving, you know, 200 years ago, they were not seeing cancer like we are now. So depending on the diseases of the day is going to depend on the prescriptions and what is actually needed to get people healthy again.
Yeah, I'm seeing it everywhere here. People in their 50s, passing away because of it. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, it's become an epidemic. And, you know, if people just knew about this energetic, you know, you just take this energetic frequency and you might never have to deal with that. And, you know, people leaving their bodies in their 50s, that's like so young. You have almost half your life still in front of you. So yeah, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but we have to gonna come to an end here soon. And my question for you is, well, first of all, for anyone who wants to dive deeper into homeopathy, because I know you mentioned a lot of your clients end up being so passionate about homeopathy that they end up taking your courses, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
do you have any course, like if someone wants to, maybe, I know you're opening the school, which is amazing. And because anybody who can be taught by you is just, I think it's so powerful because you're so knowledgeable and you touch on energetics, which, you know, other homeopaths, I've never heard them talk about this. So, yeah, anyone who wants to get started, what with homeopathy, what can they do? Like, what courses would they take?
So we do have one course, and it's sort of the beginners where you're really dipping your toes in and you're like, wow, I just want to know more and I want to look after my family more or myself. That would be the one that we call Welcome to the Revolution. And it just touches on a lot of different aspects of homeopathy, because even one aspect that people, you don't really hear about in the mainstream, but it's called homeoprophylaxis, which is if there's an infectious disease flying around, you can use homeopathy, the energy, to expose your body to the energy of that infection first, sort of so your body recognizes it. And if you were to come into contact with something, gnarly like that, your body already energetically has pushed it away. So you are not susceptible to it anymore. And that is so fascinating because Samuel Hahnemann, that medical doctor who founded homeopathy, he found that if people were dosing with belladonna, they would be completely immune from contracting scarlet fever, which back then was sweeping through. And so they had people lining up around the block just to get the remedy belladonna, which I'm sure you probably even have at home. And it's a really common, homeopathic remedy just for like fevers, sore throats, all of that. And so a medicine like that was so powerful to prevent anyone contracting that disease. So we talk about those sorts of things in the course, using it in a classical sense, and then the first aid aspects of it, all about like frequency, dosing, how to use it, how to store it. That's like our smallest course. Then we've got like a one step up course, which is for more your health professionals like naturopaths or kinesiologists, anyone with a deep understanding, of the human body, and they want sort of access to the homeopathic remedies and sort of being able to dabble with that, and adding it into their practice. But it's really within the scope of like your first aid or fertility within that short course, because it's only 12 modules and then a one-on-one with me. So it's not enough to say, I'm a full-blown homeopath. It's like that takes at least 2 years for people to treat anything and everything. But yeah, if anybody wanted to sort of be a homeopath who can treat asthma, eczema, like literally any condition, and recalibrate people's vital force or even heal themselves, that's really our advanced practitioner of homeopathy course, which is the school that you were talking about. So there's
I wish I
three
was
different options
there.
for you.
It's
Which so
because
I
people
wish
can
you were
attend
too.
physically, right?
What was that?
People can attend like it's a school that you go to, right?
Yeah.
Physically.
So it will be, so it's an all online course because we've got so many people internationally who are doing it. So we've got 500 people, maybe like 520 now, which is
Amazing.
so amazing. It's like, this is what we wanted all along, is for people to understand homeopathy, to bring it back and sort of really start a fire that, can't be suppressed. It can't be put out. It's like a real, we're just like, going to change things. So we do have our bricks and mortar school so that all of our international and our domestic friends can actually come and stay with us and sort of do an internship. And it's just nice to be around other homeopaths, practicing your dispensing, making up your own little kits. It's like nice to do with people. But the great majority of our participants, they're like all international and not actually local because, yeah, it is all online. These days, online, that flexibility, and study when you want. So it makes it so much easier.
And so once someone has taken that 2-year course, they are certified homeopath.
Yep. Yeah,
That's
and it would depend. We would look at their regulations where they live. In Australia, absolutely. In the US, yes. I'm not sure, like, say in France. I know I have a feeling that you guys actually need to be almost medical doctors. If I'm not mistaken,
I
it's
think
all,
so.
yeah, I think that is the rules over there that you need to be a medical doctor to practice homeopathy. And I know in Belgium that's the case. They sort of, in different countries, there's different rules.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I moved
Mm.
to Australia.
Please do. We'll be ready for you.
Yeah. Okay. So, if there's one last question, if there is one thing that you could tell people about homeopathy, what would it be? It's a deep one.
I guess one thing for me that I think about a lot is that what I see with homeopathy, the power of frequency, it is so remarkable. It really is. When I see the physical changes that happen with just a frequency, then for me, knowing the power of thoughts on impacting frequency, even looking at, Emoto's work, people have everything really that they do have those frequencies inside themselves. They can do this. A lot of people, they just fall into looking for, like, what is that thing outside of me, like, constantly, I need something else. But I do think that the real power of the human being to generate those frequencies, it is within. And homeopathy, certainly, it's a little stimulus, like a little tool. But if people just realize the true power of frequency alone, I think that they could transform, their whole lives. And I think that God has given that to each and every one of us. Even prayer, it is a frequency. And so flooding your body with that, the gratitude, like, for your health, it is a physical, measurable thing. And so, yes, homeopathy does catapult it. And that is the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual. It's all in one. But I do think that, yes, the human being has been given everything that they need to heal everything.
Yeah, because I heard as well, like most illnesses, they're not an illness of the human body, they're an illness of the spirit expressing themselves in the body. And it's like, once you know that, like we are this, I see it sort of like we are this antenna, this generator of energy, but we also receive energy. And if we get the frequencies right, then we naturally, this channel is all about manifestation. Like we naturally attract those things into our life. So it's
Yeah.
so powerful. Before I forget, you have the first aid remedy kits, right? If someone wants to buy, like you have these entire kits for the family.
Yeah, we do. So they just treat all of the first aid things at home. So it's just sort of your basic flu, fevers, teething, colic, any of those sorts of things, gastro, tonsillitis, ear infections. And then it's got your basic mental and emotional things. So sort of anxiety. We've got some for parasites in there, all of that. So I'm not sure if you already have your own, like, codes and all of that set up. If you don't, the girls will set you up with that ASAP. But yeah, the
That's
kits are amazing. Like, everybody should have a kit in their home. Doesn't matter where it's from. You just need homeopathy, at least a basic kit in your home.
Yeah. And you can use it on your children, on your pets. I've used it on my cats and it has worked wonders. So yeah,
I
I'm
love it.
just so grateful for this knowledge to go out to the public and grateful for what you are doing as well in your mission. And I can tell it's already so powerful, but you're just getting started.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You are absolutely amazing.
Thank you. So are you. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the channel. I can't wait for this to go live, and I'm so grateful to have had you here.
Thank you
And
so much. I appreciate it so much.